Hi, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP. And first and foremost, I would like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. The topic of this video will be an open address and question to the viewership that has decided to be a part of my channel and take in the media that I'm producing. When I first started making videos, I did not make them necessarily with the intention of being popularly consumed. And I still will make videos with the intention of them being popularly consumed. I will always continue to make videos being concerned with accuracy and description and insight, argumentation, empirical bases, and logical ordering and the structuring of things will be at the heart of anything I do, whether it's popular or if it's unpopular. Now, the address in the question is that the videos that I've noticed have gotten the greatest amount of views and the things that people seem to be more interested in is type itself, and not necessarily the corollary things I like to talk about with type. I will continue to make those videos, but what occurred to me by way of something my INTJ friend was saying to me is that why don't you make videos on types? And I'm just not interested in them per se. But there's also another reason why I don't make videos on types. And it's something that I have to bring to bear with the viewership insofar as if you want to say yes or no. Because I make videos by way of request oftentimes. And this is something that's come to my mind, but is not necessarily for me or for my gain. It's for the audience's gain and the community. I'm here to serve the community per se. So I'm asking the community, but I want to first say this to the community, that the reason I don't focus on types is because there has, first, I am not a clinical psychologist, nor am I an affective neuroscientist or a biologist. I read a great deal of clinical research, research in affective neuroscience, cognitive science, and neurophysiology. I have taken 3 classes on biology and molecular biology and biological anthropology. So I have a training per se, but I have no PhD. The psychologists that I'm familiar with in the work that I'm familiar with first starts with Jung and Freud, then it would go to Adler, Carl Rogers, Piaget, Jordan B. Peterson, and Monbordier. And those are the works that I've read insofar as tomes and books. And I've taken a general psychology class also. So what I'm trying to say is my background is one of a scientist, and it's not one of a typist. I'm not a typist. And my initial research into typology was by way of the reference of my NF friends, and I got into typology not in the same way that everyone else gets into typology. I didn't first take a test. I first read Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung, suggested to me by a professor I had. Then I read Psychological Types by Carl Jung, and then I left it all on the shelf and didn't really pay attention to it because I was just going around consuming information and trying to figure out and understand things about human nature and the world. And people essentially, because at this time I was having very, very severely contentious relationships with people. I did not understand people at all, and I did not have a particular like for them either, which may be something that a lot of INTPs find themselves in, but I didn't understand people and I didn't like them. and I had a desire to be somehow influencing a community, and a subsequent desire to be at the center of what people understood in the community and truth. I always had a habit of correcting people when I was younger about things, whether or not saying facts were wrong, or showing some sort of skepticism to where we need to question these facts, or showing how something was logically incorrect or something wasn't sound or invalid. That's something I wanted to do, and so I was being driven in very different directions in a lot of ways, and that's how I got into typology. And then I took the test because I first read Jung's work when I was 16 years old, and man, it was crazy, and it's still crazy now, and I'm an adult. So, and then I took the test when I was 19, or when I first turned 19, when I turned 19, because my girlfriend and I were having a lot of issues, and I wasn't really good at understanding people before, and then I found out she was an INFP and I was an INTP and things, and it was just a very interesting jump into typology. Now, the reason I mention that is that I'm not a MBTI analyst. I'm not a MBTIist. I understand and I know Isabel Briggs's work, but that she's not who I base my understanding of things on, and that's not whose work I use. I've read Kiersey's Please Understand Me 1 and 2. I've read differing gifts. I've read a lot of literature. I have in the typological community. However, the individual thoughts who most heavily influenced me would be Jung. It would be early Jung. It would not be post-age Jung. And I'll get to that. Insofar as that, the things that Kiersey and Briggs speak of are not one. Briggs's behaviorism, socionics. I don't have any interest in socionics. I don't have any interest in a lot of the other personality inventories that exist. The only ones I pay attention to are MBTI and the Big Five model, and all the rest of them I have no interest, nor do I look at them per se. I've read the Enneagram things, and let me just finish my previous statement. Briggs is a behaviorist fundamentally, which that's not who or what Jung's work was concerned with. He was really concerned with motivational patterns, and just what does it mean to be human per se. And by the influence of Freud, though his mother, I believe, was a mystic and his parents were Christians per se, so he had a mystical and a spiritual side of him originally in his existence or his upbringing. But then he found the school of Freud, and Freud was a positive rational materialist and was not a spiritualist at all. His theory was nested in what was at the time the greatest body of empirical research that he could get his hands on, and he wedded his theory with the most powerful scientific theory at the time outside of Newtonian mechanics, and that would be Darwinian evolution, or natural selection, and evolution by way of natural selection and sexual selection, descent with modification. And that's where Jung's thoughts started. They didn't stay there, obviously, because he was a Nietzschean scholar, and he was also very big into mythology, and he needed to revivify the Christianity that he lost as a young man, and that led to a lot of his Gnosticism and mysticism in his later life. And I distanced myself from the mystical and Gnostic thoughts, and the mystical and Gnostic thoughts in Jung are where a lot of the proponents of Enneagram attach their propositions and precepts onto Jung's work, because Jung definitely had that in him. And I'm not here to criticize Jung or mysticism or Gnosticism. I'm just not a mystic, and I'm not a Gnostic. And I think a lot of the things that Jung presented to the world at the time, those were viable explanatory mechanisms. However, it's not as if neuroscience, affective cognitive neuroscience, cognitive science, or physiology, or biology, or human anthropology can explain it all, but it can explain a great deal of the things that Jung originally presented, and it's the empirical explanatory platform that I wed to Jung's work, and the one that causes me to cut off the other things, though I am spiritual in my existence in some respects, as I'm an existentialist. And so I think that the questions of meaning and human existence are inextricably linked to typology, insofar as that its purpose, as what it stood for as a tool, was to differentiate oneself or to actualize oneself. And it's to where I would say the next body of work in terms of psychologists, I think I'm pretty sure I mentioned Carl Rogers, but Carl Rogers, the humanist, Viktor Frankl, Maslow, the existentialist and humanist psychologists are the next camp that I think people can hear in the things I say. Those are the dominant influences in my analysis and interpretation of personality theory. And I'm concerned with personality theory as a broad field, and see Carl Jung as being the father of personality theory in its modern context. And that's how I established myself and walked through it, with the Big Five model being the best empirical model that exists. And I pull the things together through those vantage points and through those perspectives. So I will say things because I've watched Michael Pierce's work, and I've commended his work on my channel. But I've watched Leonid Type-Tip's work, I've watched Enid Patterson's work, and I've watched Talking with Famous People's work. And I don't know if I've mentioned all of them on my channel, but if not, I think I've directly mentioned all four of those individuals. But I just don't enter into the general arena of type because it is different. It is different. I use a toolbox of terminology that arises from all the literature that I've read, and is one that tries to be accurate, not insofar as one's immediate experience necessarily, but trying to get to the underlying motivations of a person. Because if I'm anything as a psychologist, it is a depth psychologist, and I'm not a behavioral psychologist. You wouldn't. I'd be a psychoanalyst if anything, but I wouldn't quite be a psychoanalyst. I don't know. It's to say this, that I am more of the psychoanalytical school of thought and the depth psychological school of thought than I am of any new age school of thought or the behavioral school of thought. I also am chiefly concerned with the material and physiological descriptions of things, and chiefly concerned with the existential and anthropological descriptions of things. What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to exist? What drives the personality? What meta aspects are there of their personality? And whatnot. Those are things that you hear me say sort of passingly in videos that I talk about type, but I don't ever do it necessarily directly unless I find something that's very interesting that I think would be of service to people per se. And I'm not a new Jungian per se because I don't. I'm just not. I'm not educated in that school of thought, and what I am educated in is science. I do science, bro. You know, that's what I do, and so that's where I'm coming from. And that's how I will present things. And they will differ per se from what others are talking about. And maybe what you've heard in typology or the popular MBTI community. But it will be heavily scientifically influenced. And that's one thing that makes me pause because I don't know how much of the audience is scientifically literate per se, and that Jung, there's a tendency, because MBTI is not directly associated with Jung, for the personality community to be very diverse in its beliefs. But Jung and Freud were Darwinian thinkers. They were evolutionary thinkers. And the way that I will describe things will require one to have somewhat of a prerequisite knowledge of these things. And if I need to make videos, then I can make videos. Like, I can do that because I know these things. So I can make videos, but that's not where I necessarily, that's not where everyone else is. And that's not how people are looking at personality. It's also to say that there is a basis of understanding that one needs to be scientifically literate in the immediate elements that make up my thoughts. And those would have to be things that I can make another video and say what those things necessarily are. Because I didn't really organize that before I came and sat before the camera. But it's to say that there will be a different demand in the audience in terms of whether or not that they can consume the information. Anybody does not need to be, no one needs to have a bachelor's degree or associate's degree or a PhD, essentially, to watch any video I make. And if anybody thinks that they do, I don't know what you've been listening to, because I try very hard to explain what I mean by everything I say and the relevancy of the scientific term I'm using and the definition of it. If you have not become more scientifically literate from watching my videos, I have not done my job. I'll say that. But, or you've just not paid attention. But it's also to say this, that there will be a portion in which I use words, and I use a lot of words so I can avoid using jargon per se, and I use metaphors, and I use mythological motifs so I can avoid using the jargon and the scientific terminology. But I'm going to use it if I make videos specifically on types, because I don't think there's another way you can say, I don't think there's better ways to say some things, because there aren't strict definitions out in the typological landscape that will be protected in of themselves by way of their conception. So that's essentially where I'm coming from. So do you want the videos or do you not want the videos, I suppose, is what I'm asking. Given that, do you want the videos or do you not want the videos? And what I'm saying explicitly that I'm going to do is make videos on each type. because there's so much that's misunderstood, per se, and there's a lot of theories that are out there. Now, I will say that the theoretical models that I create is going to cut off some possibilities of what others are saying. I don't think necessarily that you can be 4 different types of INFPs. I don't think there's 4 different types of INFPs. I'll just put it like that. I think that there is one INFP, and people are variations of that. But there's variations in people, but there's not subtypes. I'm not a subtypist. Like, I'm not that. I'm not that. I unify things more or less rather than create divergent schematizations. Though I do think that you have patterns of shadow action and behavior in certain types that'll make them get into certain they become possessed by archetypal expressions per se. But I don't think you get variations. I just think you have maladaptive people in some respects. It's like, no, it's to say that, and I don't mean in terms of functional strength and things like that. That's not what I'm saying there. But no, it's just to say that there's going to be a lot of theories out in the land of YouTube that you've probably collected and gained, and I'm just going to sort of, with very rather analytical volition, shoot them down. Not meaning to, per se, but I know that there's some things that I think, and by the way that I've constructed things, that they're going to be completely antithetical to some other things that exist, because some things people say are just outright stupid. Like, I will say that. And I think they're outright stupid because there is a scope in which typology lives in, and it is a functional one. It's what it can do for people and what people can do with it. It is an explanatory mechanism, but it is an explanatory mechanism that has a certain jurisdiction. Typology is concerned with motivation. It's the why, not the what. It's not physiologically based, and it's not here to describe why personalities look the way that they do and why things are the way that they are, or how they come to be the way that they come to be. But it does for a person's motivational schematizations, but it doesn't do that for it itself. It's not trying to be internally consistent per se, because it is pragmatic in its scope per se, because Jung was a clinician. He was not a researcher. That's not what he was. He was an ontologist. No, he wasn't an ontologist. He was more like Lynn Isabel, or he was more like man, I'm blanking on her name. Either way, there are people who develop their theories by way of being in the field with their subjects per se, rather than doing experimentation. And ontology is what that's called. And Jung was an ontologist, and same with Freud, but they were not researchers, and they didn't do empirical studies or anything like that, and they weren't about that. They just weren't interested in that. That wasn't interesting to them. They didn't care, really. That wasn't like they found a boon that was much more richer, per se, than empiricism. However, the landscape that we exist in now, insofar as the other ideological systems that are floating about, and the philosophical ones, and all the other things that get brought and added to typology, per se, by way of people's own motivations and whatnot, is a lot of craziness, and it's crazy to me. It's craziness to me because it's not sound. It's not based on Jung. It's not based on, and I'm not gonna base my thoughts on MBTI. So it could be based on MBTI, and I just don't know. And I'm not a socionics person. If anything, I under the neo-Jungians thought that I do ascribe to is Dr. Beebe's, because it's not as if any of that's been empirically tested, but I don't need somebody to tell me the empirical facts and how they connect to Beebe's work, because I can see the patterns and the connections by way of neurophrenology, insofar that the psyche, the brain is arranged in such a way, and neurosubstrates are arranged in very particular ways, and there's very real generality across brains. That brains are essentially the same across people unless they have asynchronistic developmental patterns, and they differ in their substrates. And typically when people differ in their substrates, which they don't, sometimes they do, and when they differ in their patterns of development, they have mental disorders of some variety, or they have personality defects, or they have high IQ, or they have something else. There's something different about them per se than the general population. It's just that when we're talking about cognitive functions and where I think the psyche lives, we are embodied things. We have bodies and we exist in our bodies. The brain is a part of the body. The mind is housed within it. The mind is an emergent phenomenon from the material substrates. When we're talking about the psyche and we're talking about all things people per se and behavior and action, we're talking about the brain. That's at least where I take it, and why I would ascribe to something that everyone has all the cognitive functions, and they have their variability of strength, degree of strength by way of their temperamental disposition, and their them being reared in their local environment. I would ascribe to that, which is not exactly what BB says, but roughly in respects to how I use it, insofar as that there's not 4 functions. There's an 8 functional stack per se, and that's going to determine what someone looks like and how they're motivated per se. And I'm never going to say how somebody acts or behaves per se. I'm just going to talk about motivations and concerns and meta aspects, which I don't know if anybody's done that. Like Michael Pierce is pretty close, and he gives really great anecdotes, but he's describing the functions. He's describing type through functions, which I'm going to describe types through functions, but I'm going to describe the types through the functions existing as subpersonalities or little motivational patterns and schemas that exist within somebody's psyche that directs them towards certain ends and means, that's going to be influenced by whether or not the fact that they're extroverted or introverted, because extroversion and introversion are patterns that at least physiologically, is a bilateral symmetry within the autonomic nervous system. And that's how I'm going to talk about things. So it's going to be different. It's going to be different. It's going to be very similar. I'm not going to get to totally, completely different results, but I am doing it this way per se to clear the kingdom per se, like to use a metaphor. There's a lot of snakes and rats running about the land, and I want to sort of make them all run off. And I don't mean that by any negatively. That's an analogy, but I'm not saying that people are snakes and rats, or that there's anything pernicious in people and snakes. But pernicious in people and their motivations. But there is something wrong with misinformation, and it's the ideological landscape that I'm looking at, not as in that this is an ideology, but the world of ideas per se and the collection of propositions that are extant out in the world that sort of move us somewhere, because I think we are all being social, abstracting beings, live in a world of ideas, and they act on us. People don't have ideas. Ideas have people. So that's really what I'm trying to police. So the question is, if it's not been made clear, would you like videos of this variety? And I have to ask you, because I'm not going to make them, because I'm not really motivated to make them per se, but because they differ from the things I'm interested in. But if the community is interested in it, because I do now have more subscribers than I ever thought. I'm like, man, I'm the most esoteric of individuals. Like, what the hell do 170 people want to do listening to the things I talk about? Like, what is wrong with these people? That's what I think sometimes. But you all are wonderful people. But just say, I'm gonna make videos. I will make videos about types specifically and how I analyze types, but it's only if there's like yays, there's some interest. It is only going to be if there's some interest, because man, it's going to be a lot of work for me. But if it's something that the community wants, then I'm all for it. So that's my video, an open address to, do you want typological analyses? As in, do you want me to analyze types? And, or give descriptions of types. Analyses and descriptions. Anyways, that's my video. A comment of yes and why, per se. Because I always ask why. Maybe you can just say yes, but yes and why would be the best. Like, but yes would work. No would work also, so if you're like, hell no, don't do that. Stick with the things you've been doing. I'd much rather consume those things. And I consume what you're talking about because it does differ and isn't about types specifically. That's why I'm interested in it. Then, yeah, I'll continue. I'll always make that content. I ain't never stopping making that content because that's the stuff that I find interesting. But if there's a desire and a want for something else, which I suspect that there is by way that the numbers have manifest in terms of views, then say yes and why. Or no. No, yes just works, no just works. But yes and why and no and why are what I'm really looking for. So, thank you for taking the time to view this video and being a part of this channel. Hopefully you will respond, and maybe you found that interesting, but that was really like more administrative than anything else I would ever do. Anyways, thank you. Have a good day.